I want to introduce to you from the 3rd District, Democrat Representative Bobby Scott. Congressman Scott, it's always good to have you on.
Well, it's good to be here. How you doing?
Well, we're doing okay. Are you here in the nation's capital today?
No, I'm here in Newport News. It snowed last night, but it looks like it's mostly gone by now.
Oh, that's good. Listen, I know that at 5 a.m. on Saturday, there were some major movements in terms of a budget in Congress. Can you give us a breakdown about what happened on the Senate side and what that might do to match up with what Paul Ryan had proposed on the House side?
Well, it's hard to really give much credit to the Ryan budget because it had a $5.7 trillion hole in it. It has $5.7 trillion in unspecified deficit reduction on the revenue side. He cut taxes $5.7 trillion, and then he said it's revenue neutral. Unless he can say how he's going to raise $5.7 trillion, it's really not a serious budget. I mean, he complained about the progressive caucus budget, which had $5.7 trillion in tax increases, where they mentioned the Black Caucus budget that I was promoting had $2.7 trillion, less than half. And the Democratic budget had about $1.2 trillion in taxes, much less, much less than the Ryan budget. He doesn't say where he gets the money. So it's not really a serious budget. Most of his cuts come from a repeal of Obamacare benefits. He keeps the Obamacare taxes and spending cuts that paid for Obamacare, but then cuts all the benefits. He also cuts Medicare and Medicaid. People will be getting just as sick as they're getting today, and all he's doing is not paying for it and shifting the cost to somebody else, mostly cost shifting to private insurance companies. Right now, when you go to the hospital with an insurance policy, you pay a little extra because about 15 to 20% of the people are showing up uninsured. Under Obamacare, they will be showing up with a health policy, so that you don't have to pay for them anymore. He's putting that cost back on the public. He has unspecified almost $1 trillion in other mandatory, which is mostly Social Security, but then says he's not cutting Social Security, so the only thing left is Medicaid and promised benefits and veterans' pensions and federal employee pensions that have already been earned. So I don't know how he gets that. So it's not really the budget has more holes than unexplained numbers. So it's hard to say how that compares to anything. The Senate budget raised the little taxes and essentially achieved the $4 trillion deficit reduction in a credible way. It's very similar to the House Democratic budget. And one of the things we have to look at is what does it do for jobs? In the House Democratic budget and the Black Caucus budget and the Progressive budget, we have significant jobs. The Democratic budget had about 2 million jobs can be expected as a result of the infrastructure and other investments. Under the Republican budget, you can count on, first of all, the sequester kicking in, and that will cost 700,000 jobs, and next year about 2 million because of the cuts. So you have a swing of about 400 million, about 2.7, maybe up to 4 million jobs swing in the two budgets, and that's really where the difference is.
As we noted, obviously a very snowy and rainy day around the Commonwealth. I want to try and bring John Fredericks back in from our Virginia Beach studios on the line. John, you there, sir?
Yes, I am, Steve.
Excellent. We just talked about the difference between the House and Senate budget, so you take it from there, buddy.
You know, Congressman Scott, what was flabbergasting to me was how to take the Democratic budget presented by the Senate seriously when, in all honesty, Congressman, they're asking for another $1 trillion in taxes, and then with all that over a 10-year period, according to their plan, they're going to actually increase the national debt by $5 trillion, and there's no balanced budget in sight. I mean, I could reconcile in my mind $1 trillion in taxes if we had an end game.
If you're having trouble finding out where the Senate's going to get $1 trillion, try to find out where Paul Ryan in the Republican budget that passed the House, where he's going to get $5.7 trillion. There's $5.7 trillion assumed tax increases in his budget.
They're not tax increases. I mean, they're reducing spending to eventually...
He cuts taxes $5.7 trillion by reducing the upper rate, and then says it's revenue neutral. The reduction in taxes he has is $5.7 trillion, so he has to raise somebody else's taxes $5.7 trillion to make that make sense.
Yeah, but I think that's called tax reform. I mean, they want to take down the...
Okay, fine, but he has to raise to make it revenue neutral, he has to raise $5.7 trillion. We're talking arithmetic.
Well,
you can get the philosophy, you got to get the arithmetic. His bill assumes $5.7 trillion in tax cuts and $5.7 trillion in tax increases. Where's he going to get it? $5.7 trillion, that's an average of about $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Family of four, $8,000 on average across the country. Now, where's he going to get it?
You're not answering my question, which is in the Democrat budget approved by the Senate, they're asking for another $1 trillion in taxes, which I'm not quibbling with that. What I'm quibbling with is $1 trillion. Not 5.7 like in the Republican budget. But then at the end of the day, over a 10-year period, the national debt would actually increase from $17 trillion to $22 trillion, and there's no balanced budget in sight. Now, you know,
now the Ryan budget increases. I don't know how much it increases the deficit, but it is not balanced until way out. So you're adding to the debt. There's deficit year after year after year, and it claims to be in balance only because he raises taxes $5.7 trillion. If he doesn't do that, if you take that out, if he doesn't raise taxes to offset his little tax reform where he's got $5.7 trillion in tax cuts, if he doesn't pay for it with tax increases, then his budget, even after all the cuts, adds $1 trillion to the instead of a $4 trillion, $4.5 trillion deficit reduction he's claiming, he has no deficit reduction. In fact, the deficit increases under his budget $1 trillion.
Congressman,
one of the things, John, that we're finally getting to is that when you cut taxes, it affects the budget, and when you cut the budget, it affects services. I mean, we had a hearing the other day on with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where they let some detainees go. Their budget got cut. They have a certain number of staff, a certain number of detainees, and people are all hot to trot about the fact that they had fewer detainees. Of course they have fewer detainees. They had fewer staff. You cut their budget. And I think when people are now noticing that if you cut taxes, it has an effect on the budget. We've been going for 30 years where people think you cut taxes, doesn't have any effect on the budget. And now we're finding out that it does. And the Ryan budget has $5.7 trillion in unspecified. I mean, everybody talks about his bottom number without discussing how he got there. He gets there by some phantom asterisk that said there'll be $5.7 trillion in tax increases. There'll be a repeal of Obamacare for $1 trillion. It's not going to happen. He cuts Medicare and Medicaid significantly, and health care, federal pensions, and veterans benefits are about 90% of his cuts. But he doesn't show any. So that's not going to happen. You're not going to cut veterans' pensions and federal pensions that have already been earned, and so you're looking at major cuts in health care and $5.7 trillion in taxes. He doesn't mention one tax increase that's going to make that a credible number.
Congressman, we get the fact that you don't like the Ryan budget that was passed in the House, But how can you then defend the Patty Murray budget, which isn't doing any any of the things that you've talked about?
I can defend the House Democratic budget and the Congressional Black Caucus budget.
Guys, because of the nature of our lines, we can't have you talk over each other. Nobody gets heard. So, John, complete the question.
We have met so many times, and you have been a consistent advocate of eliminating the George Bush II tax cuts in their entirety, and you've said to me over and over, had we done that, we wouldn't be in this mess. So I understand your opposition to the Paul Ryan House budget. What I'm trying to understand is how you can defend the Patty Murray budget in the Senate that increases taxes by $1 trillion and still adds on to the debt with no end in sight.
Congressman?
Okay, you keep complaining about the $1 trillion in the House budget. The Senate budget was done late at night, so I'm not sure of all the details in it, but it's very similar to the House budget, which had about $1.2 trillion in taxes. We cut taxes $3.9 trillion, and as you've indicated, it would have been much better if we had just let that expire. We could have taken care of the sequester and the other alternative minimum tax and what's called the doc fix in Medicare. We could have taken care of all that and then done a tax cut. It would have been a lot more rational. What we did was cut $3.9 trillion in taxes, and what the Democratic position is we, in order to cancel the sequester, if we would raise $1.2 trillion, we could cancel the sequester with that revenue. I think that makes a lot more sense than maintaining the sequester. Now, you keep complaining about the $1 trillion in tax increases. Remember that Paul Ryan's budget has $5.7 trillion worth of increases. Now, the way the budget is written, you don't technically specify how you're going to get the money. You just your budget just shows increased revenues $1.2 trillion. Ryan's budget assumes the cuts. The only thing he specifies are cuts in rates at a cost of $5.7 trillion, and then the instructions to Ways and Means is make it revenue neutral, which means the only way you can do that is to raise taxes $5.7 trillion. Now, you keep talking about it's balanced. It's only balanced if you come up with $5.7 trillion, and as you've indicated, you don't even want the first trillion in tax increases.
From the 3rd District of Virginia, Congressman, it's always good to talk to you, and we're glad we were able to give you the opportunity to present your side of the budget battle here. And unfortunately, we are up against time here, but we thank you so much for the time as always, and get back to D.C. from Newport News in a safe fashion, won't you?
Thank you.